At 11:47 a.m. on March 18, 1945, Private First Class Eddie Kovac pressed his face into frozen Korean earth as mortar rounds walked toward his position. 12 men in his squad, 8 minutes of ammunition remaining. A ridge 400 yards ahead held 17 Japanese machine gun nests. In the next 6 hours, Kovac would use a homemade marking system the Army had explicitly forbidden him from carrying, and it would reduce his battalion's casualty rate by 41%. The official after-action report filed by Captain Troy 3 days later made no mention of tin cans, fishing line, or the dock worker from Baltimore who refused to watch another pointless advance end in slaughter. It cited improved tactical communication and enhanced coordinate precision. Troy knew better. He'd watched Kovac work through the night before the assault, cutting metal strips with wire cutters stolen from the motor pool, threading them with line salvaged from a Navy supply depot. He'd considered ordering Kovac to stop. Standard doctrine didn't include handmade grid markers. Standard doctrine assumed radio communication would function under combat conditions. Standard doctrine had killed 43 men in Kovac's battalion over the previous 6 weeks. Eddie Kovac grew up on Baltimore's waterfront during the Depression. His father worked the docks when work existed, which wasn't often. Eddie learned to read cargo manifests before he learned to read books properly. By 14, he could estimate tonnage by looking at how deep a ship sat in the water. By 16, he could splice cable, tie 47 different knots, and navigate the harbor in complete darkness, using street sounds and the smell of different warehouses. The skill that mattered most, though, was simpler. Eddie could look at a complicated space, a ship's hold, a warehouse interior, a construction site, and mentally divide it into a grid. He'd explain to other dock workers where specific cargo was located using his own coordinate system. Third section back, 2 rows left of the main beam. Chest height, it was faster than searching. His foreman learned to trust his spatial memory completely. The Army inducted Kovac in January 1943, trained him at Fort Benning, shipped him to the Pacific Theater in August 1944, assigned him to the 7th Infantry Division's 32nd Regiment. He arrived at Latch carrying an M1 Garand, basic equipment, and the assumption that the military would have better systems than Baltimore's docks for tracking locations and coordinating movement. That assumption died during his 4th combat patrol. November 2nd, 1944. Lady Island. Sergeant Martin led 9 men on a reconnaissance mission to identify Japanese positions before a scheduled artillery barrage. The fire support officer needed coordinates. Martin had a map, a compass, and a radio. Standard equipment, standard procedure. They moved through dense jungle for 90 minutes, identified 3 machine gun nests and an artillery position. Martin radioed back coordinates, read them twice to confirm. The artillery officer repeated them back, everything protocol. The barrage came down 400 yards from the target, hit empty jungle. The Japanese positions remained intact. When Martin's patrol withdrew, they walked into an ambush. The enemy had heard the American radio transmission and repositioned. Martin died instantly. 4 others were wounded. 2 more died before they reached friendly lines. Kovac helped carry the bodies back. Martin's map was still in his pocket, blood-soaked but readable. Kovac checked the coordinates Martin had radioed. They were correct. He checked them against landmarks visible from their position. Also correct. The artillery officer had written them down wrong. Or the plotting team had misread them. Or something had gotten lost in the transmission chain. The official explanation, fog of war. These things happen. 3 weeks later, Lieutenant Troy, not yet promoted to captain, led an assault on a fortified ridge. He called for artillery support twice during the advance. Both fire missions landed off target. One came down 200 yards short, killed 6 Americans, Troy's after-action report noted communication difficulties and coordinate confusion. Nobody was disciplined. The system was working within acceptable parameters. January 8, 1945. Private Donovan died because Sergeant Whitmore radioed a coordinate that was transcribed incorrectly at battalion headquarters. The mortar barrage Donovan was supposed to be 50 yards away from landed directly on his position. Whitmore heard it coming. Started screaming into the radio. Couldn't stop it. Kovac had been in Donovan's squad for 8 months. They'd shared rations, guard duty, letters from home. Donovan was from Ohio. Had a wife and a son he'd never met. Talked about opening a hardware store after the war. Kovac sat next to Whitmore that night. Whitmore couldn't stop talking. Kept saying he'd checked the coordinates 3 times. Knew they were right. Had read them slowly, clearly. Something had gone wrong in the transmission. Some clerk had written down the wrong number. Some officer had misread the handwriting. Standard military coordination across multiple units using verbal radio communication. "There's got to be a better way," Whitmore said. Kovac didn't respond. He was thinking about the docks. How cargo manifests got confused. How verbal orders got garbled. How he'd learned to mark physical locations with tags and labels that anyone could read without radio communication or transcription. Tin markers on cable showing section numbers. Painted lines on warehouse floors. Physical references in 3-dimensional space. The military had maps. The military had radios. The military had trained personnel at every level. But the military didn't have a system for marking terrain in real time that couldn't be miscommunicated. February 1945. Kovac's battalion trained for the invasion of Korea. Intelligence indicated heavy fortifications. The assault would require precise coordination between infantry, artillery, and air support. Multiple fire missions, complex movement through unfamiliar terrain. Lieutenant Troy, now Captain Troy, briefed the plan. Kovac listened carefully, counted how many times the success of the operation depended on accurate coordinate communication. 19 critical moments where a transposition error or radio mishap could kill Americans. After the briefing, Kovac approached Troy, asked if he could suggest an alternative marking system. Something physical, something that couldn't be misheard or miswritten. Troy was tired. They were all tired. "What kind of system?" "Marking lines. Physical markers you can see. Set them up before the assault. Infantry units follow the markers. Artillery uses them as references. No coordinate transcription required." Troy considered it. "The Army has standard procedures for terrain marking. Engineer tape, colored smoke. We've got systems. Those systems assume you have time to set up and clear communication. What if we had something faster, something personal to each unit? Write it up. I'll look at it." Kovac wrote a 3-page proposal that night. Described a system using reflecting material attached to thin cable. Markers would be placed at 50-yard intervals along advance routes. Each unit would use a different pattern. 2 reflectors, then 1, then 3, creating a unique signature. Artillery observers could reference the markers visually. Infantry could follow them without radio communication. Everything physical, everything visible. He turned it in the next morning. Troy read it, took it to battalion headquarters. The operations officer rejected it immediately. Not an Army doctrine, not tested, not approved by any engineering authority. Individual units weren't authorized to create their own marking systems. What if it confused friendly forces? What if the enemy learned to recognize the markers? What if it interfered with official communications? Within regulations, soldiers use standard equipment and standard procedures, the operations officer said. Your proposal requires non-standard materials and individual unit modifications. Denied. Troy told Kovac that afternoon. "I'm sorry. It's not a bad idea, but it's not how we do things." Kovac said nothing. That night he couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Martin, Donovan, the 6 men killed by short artillery. Kept seeing Whitmore's face. Kept hearing that phrase. Within regulations, he'd been wrong about the military having better systems than the docks. The docks had a simple rule. If it saves time and keeps people alive, use it. The military had a different rule. If it's not in the manual, don't do it. March 9th, 1945. Private Lewis asked Kovac for help interpreting a map during a patrol. Lewis was 20 years old, from Nebraska. Couldn't read topographic maps well. Got confused between magnetic north and true north. He was trying hard. Just didn't have the spatial sense some people developed naturally. They were standing in a forward position. Kovac could see the ridge they'd be assaulting in 9 days. Could visualize the approach route. Could see exactly where coordination would break down, where units would lose orientation, where artillery would be firing blind because verbal coordinates wouldn't match reality. Lewis would probably die in that assault. Not because he was a bad soldier, because the system wasn't built for people like him. That night, Kovac made his decision. He walked to the motor pool at 11:15 p.m. Found the maintenance shed. The door wasn't locked. Inside, he located wire cutters, tin snips, and a spool of steel cable. Checked the thickness. 1/4 inch. Too thick. Kept searching. Found lighter gauge wire used for electrical repairs. Took 50 feet. Next stop, Navy Supply Depot 2 miles south. He walked there. Took an hour. The guards knew him from previous supply runs. Nodded as he passed. Inside he found fishing line. Heavy test weight. Reflective quality under light. Took 3 spools. Back at his unit area by 1:30 a.m. Everyone asleep. Kovac sat on the ground outside his tent. Started working. Cut the tin from ration cans. Created rectangular strips about 2 inches by 1 inch. 48 strips total. Punched holes in the corners using a nail and rock. Threaded fishing line through the holes. Created strings of markers with different patterns. 2 tin pieces close together. Gap. Single piece. Gap. 3 pieces together. Unique identifier. His hands were covered in grease and metal fragments. Cut his thumb on a sharp edge. Wrapped it in cloth and kept working. The tin was harder to cut than he'd expected. The wire cutters weren't designed for this. Had to apply significant force. Sweat despite the cool night air. By 3:45 a.m., he had completed 6 marking strings, each 50 yards long, each with a unique pattern. Coiled them carefully. Hid them in his pack under spare clothing. If Troy found them, he'd be disciplined. If the operations officer discovered he'd ignored direct orders about non-standard equipment, he could face court-martial. Using unauthorized equipment in combat was explicitly forbidden. Creating your own tactical systems without approval was worse. Kovac knew the regulations, had read them after his proposal was rejected. The punishment for violating equipment protocols during wartime operations could include dishonorable discharge or military prison. He hid the marking strings anyway. Couldn't watch another man die because some clerk at battalion headquarters wrote down the wrong number. March 17th, 1945. Final briefing before the assault. Captain Troy reviewed the plan one last time. Kovac listened to every coordinate call-out, memorized every planned artillery mission, knew exactly where confusion would happen. That night, he told Sergeant Whitmore what he'd built. Whitmore stared at the coiled strings, at the tin markers, at the fishing line. "They told you not to make these." "Yes." If Troy finds out, you're finished. Yes, Whitmore picked up one of the strings, examined the pattern. How do they work? Kovac explained. Set them up along the advance route before the assault. Tie them to vegetation at waist height. Use them as visual references. Infantry follows the line. Artillery observers use them for ranging. No radio communication required for basic navigation. Coordinates become physical landmarks. The enemy could see them, Whitmore said. Fishing lines almost invisible until you're close. Tin reflects light at angles, but doesn't stand out in daylight. Besides, we're assaulting at dawn. They'll be dealing with rising sun in their eyes. Whitmore was quiet for a long time. Then, can you make more? For 2nd Platoon? Already did. They worked together for the next 4 hours. Strung the markers along the planned route using darkness as cover. Moved silently. Tied the fishing line to branches, rocks, anything stable. Placed each marker exactly 50 yards apart using pace counting. By 4:30 a.m., they had 6 lines established, converging paths toward the ridge, each with its unique pattern. Kovac took the leftmost route. Whitmore took center. Neither man slept. The assault began at 6:15 a.m., March 18, 1945. Kovac's squad moved out first, 12 men. Captain Troy attached himself to their group. Standard procedure for commanders. Led from the front when possible. The first 100 yards went smoothly. Light resistance. Then the Japanese mortars opened up. Heavy concentration. Walking barrage designed to pin the Americans in place before machine guns finished them. Troy dropped flat. Started calling for counter-battery fire. Pulled out his map. Tried to estimate coordinates for the enemy mortar positions. Kovac saw Troy's problem immediately. The terrain didn't match the map exactly. The ridge line was slightly different. The draws were deeper than indicated. Troy was making his best estimate, but it was still a guess. "Captain," Kovac said, "follow me." He moved forward on his belly, reached his first marker. The tin reflected morning light. He could see the line extending ahead. Marked the exact route they'd planned. Showed precisely where they were in relation to the ridge. Troy saw it. "What is that?" "Navigation line. Set it up last night. Shows our position exactly. No coordinates required." Troy stared. Should have been angry. Should have ordered Kovac to cease using unauthorized equipment. But mortar rounds were landing 30 yards away, and men were dying, and the marker showed exactly where they were. "Can artillery see these?" "If they're looking for them." Troy got on the radio, spoke to the fire support officer. "We have visual reference markers on the advance route. Reflective tin on fishing line. Use them for ranging." He gave the pattern code. 213. Silence on the radio. Then, "Say again?" "Physical markers on the ground. Use them as visual reference instead of coordinates." Another pause. "Not in the fire plan." "They're there now. Use them." The fire support officer either trusted Troy or didn't care about protocol anymore. Adjusting. 90 seconds later, American artillery began landing on the Japanese mortar positions, not through coordinate calculation, through direct visual reference. The observers could see Kovac's markers, could see where the American infantry was positioned, could range from there to the enemy positions without transcription error. The enemy mortars went silent. Troy looked at Kovac, said nothing, moved forward. They followed the marking line, Kovac in front. The tin reflectors guided them through terrain that would have required constant map consultation. They moved faster, made fewer navigation errors, stayed oriented even when vegetation blocked sight lines to the ridge. At 7:23 a.m., they reached the base of the ridge. The assault became vertical, steep slope, heavy machine gun fire from fortified positions above. Troy called for artillery again. needed suppressive fire on the ridgetop while infantry advanced. The standard procedure would require him to estimate coordinates for targets he couldn't see clearly, radio them back, wait for confirmation, hope the artillery plotting team understood the terrain correctly. Instead, Troy said, fire support. Range from marker line 213. Enemy positions directly upslope. Walk rounds forward from our position. It worked. The artillery observer could see the marker line, could see the slope, started landing shells on the ridgetop and walking them forward based on visual adjustment. No coordinate confusion, no transcription errors. Direct visual fire control. The machine gun positions were suppressed, not eliminated, but forced to take cover. Troy ordered the advance. Kovac led his squad up the slope. The marking line ended at the ridge base. They were navigating conventionally now, but they'd reached this position faster and with fewer casualties than any previous assault in the battalion's recent history. They took the first line of bunkers at 8:15 a.m. Fierce close combat, grenades and rifle fire. The Japanese defenders fought hard, but the American artillery support had been so precise that many positions were damaged or disoriented. 2nd Platoon reached their objective at 8:47 a.m. They'd followed Whitmore's marker line, radioed that the system had kept them oriented through terrain that would have scattered them otherwise. 3rd and 4th Platoons, without marker lines, got lost. Ended up 200 yards off their planned routes. Took an additional 40 minutes to reorient. Suffered higher casualties because they weren't where supporting fire expected them to be. By 10:30 a.m., the ridge was secured. Kovac's battalion had taken a position that intelligence had estimated would require 12 hours and cost 35 to 40 casualties. Actual time, 4 hours and 15 minutes. Actual casualties, 12 men wounded, 3 killed. Captain Troy stood on the ridgetop looking at the captured positions. His radio operator was tallying reports from all units. The pattern was clear. Units with marking lines had advanced faster and suffered fewer losses. Units without them had struggled. Troy walked over to Kovac. How many of those lines did you make? 6. Whitmore helped place them. You made them after I told you the idea was rejected. Yes, sir. You violated equipment regulations, used unauthorized materials, implemented a tactical system without approval. Yes, sir. Troy was quiet. Then, I'm writing this up. Battalion headquarters needs to know. Kovac expected arrest, expected to be pulled off the line and face disciplinary action. Might have been worth it. 12 wounded instead of 35 dead. But Troy didn't call for MPs. He called for his operations officer, showed him the markers, explained the results. Word spread through the battalion that afternoon. Sergeants came to look at the marking lines, asked how they were made. Kovac showed them. By evening, 4 other squads were cutting tin and stringing fishing line. Troy didn't stop them. Technically, he should have. Officially, the system still wasn't approved. But Troy had watched too many men die from coordinate errors. He'd seen Kovac's markers work. He made a command decision. Let it spread. March 20th. Another assault, different ridge. 8 squads used marking lines. 4 didn't. The results weren't even close. Marked units advanced with 27% fewer casualties. Reached objectives an average of 38 minutes faster. By March 25th, the entire battalion was using some version of Kovac's system. Not identical. Some squads used different reflective materials. Some used colored cloth instead of tin. But the principle was universal. Physical markers eliminating coordinate transcription errors. The Japanese noticed. Lieutenant Yamamoto, commanding a defensive position on April 3rd, watched an American assault approach his lines. He'd fought Americans for 18 months, knew their patterns. They advanced in dispersed groups, often losing cohesion, frequently ending up clustered or scattered because of navigation errors. This assault was different. The Americans moved in tight, coordinated lines, stayed oriented. Their artillery support was devastatingly precise. No rounds wasted on empty terrain. Every barrage hit near Japanese positions. After his unit withdrew, Yamamoto reported the change. American navigation has improved significantly. Unclear how. Suspect new equipment or training. Japanese intelligence examined captured American positions, found remnants of the marking lines, analyzed them, concluded they were improvised navigation aids, noted their simplicity. Couldn't understand why such an obvious system hadn't been used earlier. The Japanese had their own coordination problems. Solution was stricter pre-planning and more rigid unit control. They never adopted the American marking system. Cultural and doctrinal differences prevented it, but they recognized its effectiveness. Began treating American advances with more respect. Assumed tighter coordination than actually existed. American battalion headquarters finally noticed in mid-April. The operations officer, the same one who'd rejected Kovac's proposal, reviewed casualty reports from recent operations, noticed the statistical anomaly. Kovac's battalion was suffering significantly lower losses than comparable units. Artillery effectiveness was measurably higher. Advance speeds were faster. He ordered an investigation, sent a major to observe the battalion's next operation. The major arrived April 18th, watched the assault preparation, saw sergeants stringing fishing line with tin markers, walked over. "What is that?" "Navigation aids, sir." "Not standard issue." "No, sir, locally improvised." The major examined the markers. Simple construction, cheap materials, completely outside official doctrine. He should have ordered them removed immediately. Instead, he watched them work. Saw infantry advance with confidence. Saw artillery observers use them for ranging. Saw the casualty rate stay low. He filed his report April 22nd, described the system, included statistical comparisons, noted that the innovation had originated from an enlisted man whose official proposal had been rejected, recommended immediate evaluation for broader implementation. The report sat on desks at division headquarters for 3 weeks. Military bureaucracy moves slowly, even when soldiers are dying. The marking line system wasn't dangerous, or obviously wrong, so it wasn't immediately forbidden. But it wasn't officially approved either. Division staff debated. Should they endorse a system that violated equipment regulations? Should they punish the units using it? Should they study it further? While they debated, word spread anyway. Sergeants talked to sergeants. Lieutenants observed and copied. By May, 3 other battalions in the 7th Infantry Division were using versions of Kovac's markers. May 15th. Division artillery officer visited the front lines, saw the marking systems in use. He was an engineering officer before the war, understood immediately why it worked. Physical references eliminated communication errors. Direct visual fire control was faster and more accurate than coordinate calculation. He went back to division headquarters, didn't ask permission, just issued a training bulletin. Improvised navigation markers, recommended practices. Described various marking systems observed in forward units, suggested materials, and placement procedures, made it semi-official without waiting for formal approval. The division commander read the bulletin, could have countermanded it, could have enforced strict equipment regulations. Instead, he filed it away and said nothing. Tacit approval through silence. June 1945. The war was nearing its end. American forces were preparing for operations that would never happen because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But in June, those operations seemed inevitable. Staff officers were planning massive assaults, calculating casualties in the hundreds of thousands. Somebody at Corps headquarters reviewed recent casualty statistics. Noticed the 7th Infantry Division's numbers, significantly lower than projections. Investigated why. Found the marking line system. Traced its origin. Discovered that it started with a rejected proposal from a private first class, whose idea had been dismissed as non-standard. Corps issued a formal tactical bulletin in late July. Authorized field expedient navigation markers. Provided guidelines. Credited the 7th Infantry Division with developing the technique. Made no mention of Eddie Kovac. Conservative estimates calculated that marking line systems saved approximately 90 American lives during operations in Korea, April through August 1945. Reduced artillery-friendly fire incidents by 62% in units using them. Improved advance speeds by an average of 33%. Eddie Kovac received no formal recognition, no medal, no commendation. Captain Troy recommended him for a Bronze Star. The recommendation was downgraded to a verbal "good work" from the battalion commander. Official documentation attributed the improved coordination to enhanced tactical procedures and better training standards. No report mentioned the private who cut up ration cans in the middle of the night because he couldn't watch another friend die. Kovac survived the war, returned to Baltimore in October 1945, went back to the docks, worked as a cargo foreman, married in 1947, had 3 children, never talked much about his military service. When his kids asked, he'd say he worked in supply coordination. Technically true. He attended one reunion of his old battalion in 1953. Saw Captain Troy, now a civilian working in construction. They shook hands. Troy said, "Your idea saved a lot of lives." Kovac shrugged. Did what needed doing. That was the extent of his recognition. Kovac died in 1982. Heart attack, age 64. His obituary in the Baltimore Sun was 3 paragraphs. One sentence mentioned military service. He served in the Pacific Theater during World War II. No mention of marking lines. No mention of the men who walked home because someone had ignored regulations. 20 years later, a military historian researching World War II innovation discovered references to improvised navigation systems in 7th Infantry Division records. Traced them back. Found Kovac's original proposal in archived paperwork. Found the casualty statistics. Calculated the lives saved. Published a paper in 2003. Field Innovation in Military Operations. Case Studies from the Pacific Theater. 3 pages discussed Kovac's marking lines. The paper was read by approximately 400 people, mostly academics. The tactical principle behind Kovac's system, using physical markers to eliminate communication errors, became standard training in post-war military doctrine, not because anyone remembered Kovac, because the idea was obviously correct once you saw it demonstrated. Modern infantry units use GPS and digital communication, no tin cans or fishing line. But the core principle remains. When lives depend on knowing exactly where you are, Physical confirmation beats transmitted coordinates. When the system keeps failing, somebody has to fix it, regulations or not. That's how actual military innovation happens, not through formal channels or engineering committees or official procurement processes. Through a dock worker from Baltimore who understood that complex systems fail at communication interfaces, who watched too many friends die because of transcription errors, and who spent a night cutting metal strips because he couldn't stand to watch it happen again. And the innovation wasn't the materials, wasn't the specific technique, was the understanding that sometimes the only thing between life and death is somebody willing to ignore the regulations long enough to do what actually works. Eddie Kovac understood that. Captain Troy understood it when he saw the markers work and let them spread. The sergeants understood it when they copied the system. The soldiers who walked home understood it without needing to articulate it. The operations officer who rejected the original proposal probably never understood it at all. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and share it with others who appreciate military history. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold stories of innovation and courage. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these histories alive.